Right now, as you listen to this, there are roughly 43 massive Japanese cargo ships sitting completely idle in the Persian Gulf.
Just floating there.
Literally just floating. I mean, they aren't loading goods. They aren't moving toward their destinations. They're just sitting there in the water, burning fuel and, burning money by the hour, completely caught in the middle of a geopolitical standoff.
Yeah, it's wild. We usually think of the global economy as this perfectly engineered, frictionless machine.
Oh, absolutely. You just click a buy button on your screen, and a few weeks later, a new smartphone or like a pair of sneakers magically appears at your doorstep.
Right, because it is incredibly easy to treat the supply chain as totally invisible. We just assume this massive conveyor belt of global trade is always running smoothly in the background, entirely divorced from the physical realities of the planet.
But then you pull back the curtain and you realize your next pair of sneakers is currently navigating war zones, pirate waters, and military blockades. That pristine e-commerce machine is actually a wildly unpredictable, high-stakes physical chess match.
It really is.
So welcome to a special edition of our Deep Dive. This is informally dubbed our Japan Stock Podcast Deep Dive. And our mission today is to look under the hood of Mitsui O.S.K lines, or MOL.
One of Japan's absolute giants in the shipping conglomerate space.
Exactly. We are looking at a stack of their financial highlights from 2017 stretching into their 2026 projections, their BLUE Action 2035 management plan, and some very intense breaking news regarding extreme tensions in the Middle East.
And just as a quick rule check before we get too deep, we have all these specific data points and reports, but our goal here isn't to sound like a dry AI reading a spreadsheet to you.
Right, nobody wants that.
Exactly. The goal is to get past the sheer incomprehensible scale of these massive cargo vessels and build what we can call a causal chain. We need to trace exactly how global crises, cutting-edge marine engineering, and shifting supply routes actually physically alter the map.
And how those map changes directly translate to earnings per share, corporate valuation, and management strategy over the next 1 to 3 years.
Spot on.
So I want to start by just getting a handle on what MOL actually is, because the footprint of this company is staggering. I mean, this is a company founded roughly 140 years ago.
Which is a massive history.
Right. And they operate over 40 distinct global routes. And they don't just specialize in one thing. They handle basically everything that can be put on the water.
Yeah, they have their hands in everything.
You've got their dry bulk division, which moves the raw materials of civilization, iron ore, coal, grain. You have energy transport carrying crude oil and LNG, which is liquefied natural gas. And then you have product transport, which covers those massive car carriers and their container ship business, which they operate through a huge joint venture one.
Right, and when you have a history spanning 140 years, your corporate evolution is essentially a mirror of modern industrial history. I mean, they've survived world wars, oil shocks, financial crises. Today, if a physical commodity is moving across an ocean, it is highly likely MOL has a hand in it somewhere along the logistics chain.
That's the thing. I was looking at their recent milestones, and I expected to see, standard logistics updates, maybe a new warehouse or a slight upgrade in engine efficiency. But instead, I am seeing things about wind power and ships breaking through polar ice.
Oh, they are doing some crazy stuff.
Right. Are they a tech company or a traditional shipping company? Because in 2022, they launched a vessel called the Shofu Maru. It's a bulk carrier equipped with a Wind Challenger system. They are literally putting sails back onto modern cargo ships.
I know, it sounds like a step backward into the 18th century, but the engineering is highly advanced. The Wind Challenger isn't just like a canvas sail flapping in the breeze.
What is it then?
It's a massive, rigid, telescoping fiberglass sail. It uses automated sensors to detect wind speed and direction, and it expands and rotates automatically to provide auxiliary propulsion.
Wait, automatically?
Yeah, entirely automated.
But why go through the trouble of engineering that? Is it just a corporate vanity project to look good on an environmental brochure?
Not at all. It comes down to raw, fundamental economics. For a shipping conglomerate, fuel is the single largest operating expense, bar none. By deploying these automated hard sails, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and therefore fuel consumption by about 5 to 8% per voyage.
5 to 8%? That doesn't sound like a ton at first.
Well, when you multiply an 8% fuel saving across a global fleet making thousands of voyages a year, the margin expansion is massive.
Okay, yeah, that makes financial sense. But what about this icebreaker thing? They built the world's first ice-breaking LNG ship specifically for Russia's Sebeda port. What is the economic advantage of sailing through frozen water?
That right there is a masterclass in altering the physical map to create a business moat.
How so?
Historically, to get liquefied natural gas from the Arctic to Asia, you had to sail all the way down around Europe through the Suez Canal and across the Indian Ocean. It's a huge trip. But by engineering a ship with a reinforced hull capable of actually reversing and grinding through thick sea ice, MOL can utilize the Northern Sea Route.
They literally sail over the top of the world.
Exactly. And it shaves weeks off the transit time compared to the traditional southern route. Less time at sea means less fuel burned, faster delivery times, and the ability to complete way more voyages per year with the exact same asset.
Wow. I'm starting to see the pattern here. And it scales up too, right? Because back in 2017, they launched the MOL Truth. This was a 20,000 TEU megaship built in Japan.
A total monster of a ship.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the listener, TEU stands for 20-foot equivalent unit. It's the standard metric for container ships. So a 20,000 TEU ship can literally carry 20,000 of those standard metal shipping containers you see on the back of semi-trucks, all stacked on a single hull.
The sheer physics of moving 20,000 containers with one engine is just a marvel. But to understand why MOL is pushing the envelope on size, ice braking, and wind propulsion, we really have to look at their BLEO Ascension 2035 management plan.
Right, the 2035 plan.
Yeah, they're actively transforming from a legacy shipping operation into what they consider a green, true global infrastructure company. They are currently taking the lead in developing methanol-fueled ships and building the world's largest ethane carriers.
But how does adopting methanol fuel actually give them a competitive advantage over another company that just buys cheaper traditional diesel ships? Like, wouldn't the cheaper ships win out?
In the short term, maybe. But the green tech future-proofs their fleet against the inevitable tightening of global emission regulations.
The regulatory side.
Exactly. The International Maritime Organization is setting incredibly strict carbon targets for 2030 and 2050. If you own the ships that already comply with the environmental laws of 2035 and your competitors are stuck with older, heavily polluting fleets, you possess a massive capital allocation mode.
Because they can't even dock, right?
Right. Your ships are the only ones legally allowed into strict European or Californian ports. Your ships avoid the crippling carbon taxes that will be levied on dirtier fuel. So that environmental technology directly translates into sustained, protected earning power over the next decade.
That is a brilliant defensive move that ultimately plays as offense. But, having the most advanced green fleet in the world doesn't matter much if you can't safely sail it through the ocean.
No, it does not.
So we need to pivot to the macro analysis here, because if you own a fleet this expansive, you are painfully exposed to every geopolitical shockwave on the planet.
You are quite literally navigating the front lines of global conflicts. And right now, the most critical variable for MOL's short-term earnings is the Middle East.
Which brings us to the breaking news. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has essentially declared a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. In response, MOL, along with other major Japanese shipping operators, have ordered their vessels to completely halt or evacuate to safe waters.
Yeah, it's a huge disruption.
This is exactly why those 43 Japan-related ships are currently just idling near the Persian Gulf that we talked about at the start.
And the scale of this specific disruption to the global economy, and particularly to Japan, is severe. I mean, Japan relies on the Middle East for over 90% of its crude oil imports.
90%?
Yes. Furthermore, about 20% of the entire world's crude oil supply passes through that exact strait, Strait of Hormuz. It is the defining geopolitical choke point of global energy.
Okay, wait, hold on. I need to interrupt because this actually seems counterintuitive to me.
How so?
I think a lot of people tracking shipping stocks operate on the assumption that a crisis is actually good for business. Historically, when supply chains get squeezed or disrupted, shipping rates skyrocket because capacity gets tight.
Right.
So if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked and people are desperate for oil, shouldn't MOL be making a massive profit off the panic? Why is this a bad thing for them?
It is a very common assumption, but it's fundamentally flawed when dealing with a hard physical blockade. Yes, the immediate knee-jerk reaction in the market is that spot rates, the price you charge to ship a container or a barrel of oil today, will jump.
Okay.
But a physical blockade is very different from just a congested port or a busy shipping lane.
Break down the mechanics of that for me. What is actually happening on the balance sheet of those 43 stuck ships?
Well, when a ship is halted due to a military blockade, its utilization rate drops to zero. It is no longer moving cargo from point A to point B, which means it isn't completing its contract.
Right.
However, the operating expenses do not drop to zero. You are still paying the daily wages of the crew. You are still burning fuel to keep the ship's generators and critical systems running. And most importantly, when a region is designated as an active conflict zone, the war risk insurance premiums absolutely skyrocket overnight.
So the cost to simply insure the vessel jumps exponentially, even if it's just sitting there doing nothing, trying to stay out of trouble.
Precisely. A premium that might normally be a fraction of a percent of the hull's value can jump to 1 or 2% per voyage. On a $100 million ship, that is a massive immediate hit to your margins.
Oh, wow.
And if we zoom out to the broader macro level, consider what a prolonged closure of Hormuz does to the global economy. It chokes off 20% of global oil, which violently drives up energy prices. That sparks rapid, widespread global inflation.
And inflation means people have less disposable income.
Exactly. If consumers in Europe or the United States are suddenly paying twice as much to heat their homes or fill their gas tanks, they completely stop buying the discretionary goods. The televisions, the sneakers, the furniture that MOL's massive container ships are built to transport.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so a geopolitical crisis of this magnitude might offer a tiny fleeting bump in spot rates, but it is ultimately a severe risk that destroys absolute consumer demand and bloats operating costs.
So a stranded ship is a liability, not an asset. Now, I want to contrast that Middle East paralysis with what is happening right now on the U.S. and China routes.
Okay, yeah.
The data shows that Asia to North America cargo volume actually jumped by 8.1% recently. Why is that route booming while the Middle East is frozen?
We are seeing an entirely different macroeconomic dynamic playing out across the Pacific. Part of that volume is driven by remarkably resilient U.S. consumer demand, sure. But a significant portion of that 8.1% jump is artificial demand driven by policy fear.
You're talking about the tariff situation.
Yes, exactly. Retailers and manufacturers in the United States are looking at the political landscape, specifically the aggressive tariff policies proposed by Donald Trump regarding Chinese exports.
Right, the threat of new taxes.
Exactly. Knowing that sweeping taxes on imported goods might be implemented soon, these companies are rushing to front-load their inventories. They're buying and shipping as much product as possible before the new tariffs take effect.
So they're basically pulling forward demand from next year into this year just to beat the regulatory clock.
You hit the nail on the head. It creates a temporary surge in cargo volume for companies like MOL, but it isn't sustainable long-term economic growth. It also ties into the broader financial tug-of-war between central banks.
How so?
Well, you have the Bank of Japan slowly moving toward tightening monetary policy and raising interest rates, while the U.S. Federal Reserve is navigating rate cuts.
And how does that interest rate dynamic physically impact a Japanese shipping company?
It all comes down to currency exposure. Shipping is an inherently global business, and freight rates are almost universally priced in U.S. dollars.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if the Bank of Japan tightens policy and the yen strengthens significantly against the dollar, the revenue MOL earns in dollars is suddenly worth less when they repatriate it back into Japanese yen on their balance sheet.
Ouch.
Yeah. They manage this through complex currency hedging, of course, but it is a constant macroeconomic headwind they have to navigate alongside the physical movement of the ships.
It's incredible how many invisible variables are steering these vessels. To really map out MOL's financial future over the next few years, we have to look at how these macro events alter the physical routes. Let's dive into the key business drivers, starting with driver number 1, the Cape of Good Hope detour.
A huge factor right now.
Yeah, because of the ongoing risks in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal region, major operators of car carriers and container ships are completely refusing to use that shortcut. Instead, they are taking the long way around the southern tip of Africa.
This is perhaps the most profound shift in global logistics we've seen in decades.
I was trying to visualize the economic impact of this, and the best analogy I could think of is a taxi driver in a busy city.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine the main highway across town is completely shut down due to an accident. The taxi driver is forced to take a long, winding, scenic route through the suburbs to get the passenger to the airport. Because the meter is running the whole time, the fare for that specific trip is much higher. However, because the trip took 3 hours instead of 30 minutes, the driver can complete far fewer total trips in a single day.
That is a flawless way to understand the mechanism of capacity absorption.
Thank you. So how does that look for MOL?
Well, if we complete that causal chain for them, the forced detours around Africa lead to significantly longer transit times. Longer transit times mean these massive vessels are tied up at sea for weeks longer than originally planned. This effectively absorbs a huge amount of the excess shipping capacity that exists globally.
Because ships that would normally be unloading in Rotterdam and getting ready for their next assignment are like still halfway down the coast of Africa.
Precisely. They are physically unavailable to take new cargo. This artificial shortage creates a fundamentally tighter supply and demand dynamic, which drives up global freight rates.
Makes total sense.
And what is crucial for the investment thesis here is that MOL does not see this as a short-term blip. They explicitly expect these car carrier detours to continue until at least March 2025.
Wow, so they are baking the disruption into their long-term models.
Yes. And financially, they have aggressively factored the immediate heavy operating costs of these longer voyages.
Yeah.
The extra fuel, the extended crew time into their Q4 projections.
Okay.
This means that once those costs are absorbed, the profit benefits from the resulting higher freight rates will start rolling directly to the bottom line. This dynamic of tight supply has actually allowed MOL to revise their forecasts upward in a very challenging environment.
That's right. They are now projecting 1.83 trillion yen in revenue and 200 billion yen in net income.
Which is massive.
1.83 trillion yen. That perfectly illustrates how a physical detour on a map translates directly into massive balance sheet revisions.
Absolutely.
Let's move to driver number 2, which is heavily impacting their energy transport division. This involves Russian sanctions and a metric called ton miles. Unpack the concept of ton miles for us, because understanding that mechanism seems completely essential to grasping the energy market right now.
It really is. It is the single most important metric for analyzing the crude oil and LNG shipping sectors. Simply put, a ton mile is 1 ton of freight carried 1 mile. It measures not just the sheer volume of the commodity you are moving, but the geographic distance you have to move it.
Okay, so I think another analogy helps here.
Go for it.
It's the difference between a pizza delivery guy doing 10 deliveries within a 1-mile radius of the restaurant versus being forced to deliver a single pizza to a town 20 miles away.
Perfect.
In the second scenario, the delivery car is tied up for an hour for just one pizza, meaning the restaurant's delivery capacity is severely strained.
That is exactly how the global energy trade is functioning right now. Apply that pizza delivery logic to the sanctions on Russian oil. Following the invasion of Ukraine, many Western nations and their allies placed heavy restrictions or outright bans on importing Russian crude.
Right?
But those nations still possess massive industrial economies. They still need millions of barrels of oil a day to function.
So if a European country can't buy oil from Russia, which is literally right next door, where do they get it?
They have to source it from much further away. They buy it from the Middle East, or they buy it from the U.S. Gulf Coast, or from South America. This means the oil is traveling a vastly greater distance across the ocean to reach its final destination.
Which drastically increases the ton miles.
Exactly. It ties up crude oil tankers for months at a time for a single delivery cycle. Just like the Cape of Good Hope detour absorbs container ship capacity, these extended ton miles absorb liquid tanker capacity.
It's the exact same dynamic.
It is. It creates a fundamentally tight supply of available ships globally, which pushes up the spot rates MOL can charge, thereby driving up their energy transport earnings. Whether it's a detour around Africa or sourcing energy from a different hemisphere, the underlying causal chain is the same. The ships are busy longer, available supply drops, and the price of freight goes up.
Man, so what does this all mean for the listener cracking MOL's actual business quality and shareholder returns? Because if I'm analyzing this company, a business model where profits rely on volatile spot rates driven by blockades, detours, and international sanctions seems incredibly precarious.
It's very precarious.
Right. How does an executive management team actually stabilize returns and protect dividends when their core business is at the mercy of chaotic geopolitics?
That is the existential question for any legacy shipping company. I mean, the boom and bust cycle of spot rates has historically destroyed a lot of shareholder value in this industry. MOL recognizes this, which is why their capital allocation strategy has aggressively shifted since around 2010.
What are they doing differently now?
They are pouring capital into building what we can call a structural moat of stability. They are systematically expanding their offshore business to build a foundation of stable, predictable profits that offset the wild, variable profits of traditional shipping.
But how do you build a stable moat on the open ocean?
By fundamentally changing what your ships actually do. They're evolving from simply moving things from point A to point B into operating floating infrastructure.
Floating infrastructure.
Yeah, a perfect example is their deployment of FSRUs.
What does FSRU stand for again?
Floating storage and regasification units. MOL operates vessels like the FSRU Challenger in Turkey And they have new infrastructure projects coming online in India.
Regasification, so they aren't just dropping off liquid natural gas, they're actually processing it.
Think about the traditional way a country imports natural gas. They have to spend a decade and billions of dollars building a massive permanent import terminal on land to receive the liquid gas, warm it up, turn it back into vapor, and pump it into their power grid.
Huge undertaking.
Massive. But an FSRU bypasses all of that. It is a massive ship that acts as a mobile import terminal. A country can literally rent the vessel, park it just offshore, hook it up to a pipeline, and plug it directly into their national power grid.
That is incredible. It's literally a plug-and-play energy grid.
It is. And they do the exact same thing with crude oil, using FPSOs, floating production, storage, and offloading vessels. They have these stationed off the coast of Brazil, acting as floating offshore oil refineries.
Okay, but where does the financial stability come in?
The magic of these floating infrastructure assets is how they are contracted. They do not operate on the volatile day-to-day spot rates of the cargo market. They operate on fixed, long-term contracts that often span 10, 15, or even 20 years.
Oh, wow. So it's guaranteed recurring revenue.
Precisely. It secures a massive baseline of reliable cash flow. This capital allocation strategy radically shifts the company's risk profile. It guarantees that MOL can fund its share buybacks and pay consistent dividends to its shareholders entirely, regardless of whether there's a sudden panic in the Strait of Hormuz or a collapse in trans-Pacific container demand.
They are locking in their baseline returns so they can weather the storms of the spot market.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating evolution. They are basically transforming into a sovereign utility company that just happens to float.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the engineering of wind-powered ships to the mechanics of blockades, and this transition into floating infrastructure. Let me try to synthesize the key drivers for you, the listener.
Sounds good.
Over the next 1 to 3 years, MOL's earnings trajectory will be heavily dictated by the tightening of global vessel supply caused by forced detours around Africa and extended ton miles from Russian sanctions, while they constantly battle the downside risk of global inflation dampening absolute consumer demand.
That perfectly captures the tension at the heart of their current valuation.
It is a delicate balance. Based on everything we've unpacked today, what is the final overarching thought you want to leave the listener with?
If we step back and look at the trajectory of the data, it raises a deeply provocative question about the future of global trade. As geopolitical fracturing forces supply chains to take longer, more expensive, and far more dangerous routes, are shipping giants like MOL evolving away from being mere logistics providers? With their floating energy terminals and massive, future-proofed fleets, are these companies quietly becoming the ultimate arbiters of national energy and economic security?
From an invisible delivery mechanism to the arbiters of national security, it completely changes how you look at the ocean. Understanding the causal chains, the detours, the ton miles, the shift to infrastructure, it allows you to actually see the patterns driving the global economy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking past the surface and keep asking the big questions.